Okay, folks, excuse me. Need to top up my drink. Yeah, this is take two. Apologies if you were with us just earlier. Had a few problems with buffering, etc. on the stream, but we're good to go again. I've just been through everything and giving it a check. It's all coming through nice and smooth now. So it's not quite live this week. Apologies for that. But welcome to the PMQ's live stream on my left eye. If you're a returning viewer, welcome back. If you're new to the channel, you're very welcome here. Just a few quick pointers before we get started in a few minutes. Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for joining us. Just to point out, if you'd like to post in the chat, you do have to be subscribed to the channel. But if you subscribe, it only takes literally 1 minute before you can add your comments in the chat as well. Please do keep it cordial. I don't have any moderators at the moment, so please do try and keep it nice and polite in the chat when you're talking amongst yourselves. If you've got a specific question or point that you'd like me to read out, please do post in the super chats. That's a great way to support the channel as well. And if you're watching on a replay and enjoyed what you saw, let us know in the comments and please leave us a super thanks as well. So we'll get going in a few minutes. Just wait for the room to fill up a little. And again, apologies if you were with us about an hour ago. When we started, we just had a few technical problems, so not quite live with you this week. We're just about ready to get going. Wait for a few people to arrive, but as you can see on the screen, it's recently revealed that Frank Hester, you can see on the left, it's been declared donated an extra £5 million to the Tory party. Check out our recent video on that as well, if you've not done so already. After the stream, of course. Put it on your watch list or bookmark it, whichever you'd prefer. And that's just the latest revelation in Tory corruption there. Unbelievable that they're still willing to take such huge amounts of money. Although not surprising when you look at the meme. Rich extremists will be tolerated in the Tory party, of course. It's not about what you stand for or your morals. It's about the size of your bank account. Okay. Regular viewers will know that we normally hang around in Keith's Fondue Lounge on our other live streams. I'm going to be foregoing that for PMQs, which is going to be every Wednesday. If you'd like to join us, now that I've ironed out these buffering problems, should be live again next week. Starting at 11:45. Just like to warm up for about 15 minutes before things get started in House of Commons. And I hope you're well. Let us know how you're doing in the chat today. So we're going to get cracking in just a moment. As I said, do keep it nice and polite and cordial. Make sure that you're subscribed and then you can join the chat. If you'd also like to consider supporting the channel with a membership, we've got some great packages available as well. One tailored specifically for live streamers, and you get some extra perks with that, including static emojis. In fact, I'll try and give you a couple of examples right now. Just bear with me. So here's a relevant one. We got Lindsay Hoyle there, got Keith. There's a couple. And the more members that we get, the more emojis and stuff that we can use, the more perks and benefits you'll be able to enjoy from just 99p. Amazing, amazing value. And of course, you'll get access to exclusive members-only live streams as well. On the standard package, which is just the price of a tasty beverage, you'll also be able to get exclusive videos, excuse me, and early access to all of our other content as well. There's lots of other perks. Please do check out that if you hit the join button. So if we're ready to go, there's just a couple of people joining live at the moment. Hope you're well. Let us know how you're doing in the chat. Thanks for being here. We'll cut across to House of Commons. We'll get started in just 1 minute. Spoiler alert though, whilst we were doing the first attempt at the stream earlier, I did notice on the stop the boats count that there was at least one So I'm going to bring up the graphics for that now, just quickly explain how you can play along. So any time that Rishi Sunak, it's got to be a Tory or Rishi Sunak says stop the boats, we've got a counter here, and every time that phrase is uttered, or phrases close to it, will allow things like, you know, stopping the boats, this kind of thing, will add to the counter, as that noise will indicate. So just put your guesses in the chat, basically. STB in capital letters times however many times you think that the Tories or Sunak are going to mention stop the boats. And if anybody guesses correctly, we're going to give a shout out at the end of PMQs as well. So just a little bit of fun, a bit of light-hearted fun to help us get through PMQs. I'm going to start at 5 past, that's just in 2 minutes now. Looks like they're all good to go. Also be interesting, just want to quickly point out, I did mention this when we tried to go live about an hour ago. Lindsay Hoyle, Speaker of the House. If Diane Abbott's in the chamber, which I'm sure she probably will be, then is he going to let her stand up and speak this week? 46 attempts she had last time out. And obviously the topic of discussion was what we just mentioned earlier with Frank Hester's donations. Not once did the Speaker of the House allow her to speak. Former colleagues as well, Diane Abbott, might be standing as an independent, of course. Labour have asked her not to stand at all, they're that worried. But I'm sure that she'll retain her seat if she does stand as an independent as well. Oh, another quick, interesting development, just while we've got a minute left. I've heard a rumour around, or I saw another YouTuber discussing it on their channel, that Paul Mason might be standing against Corbyn. He's trying to get into Labour, he's trying to become a candidate at the next election. I think he's already attempted to get on the ballot a few times before without success. For those of you who don't know him, he's a former regional news presenter turned neoliberal kind of tin hat, basically. For those of you who are familiar, how he was trying to link left-wing groups, left-wing Labour voters, Labour members, to all these spurious international groups with a very dodgy chart that he managed to produce that accidentally got leaked. Someone who claims to have formerly supported Corbyn, but recently really sticks the boot in, so that could be an interesting development. Okie dokie then, right. We'll be seeing Lindsay shortly, I'm certain of that. I think we can get cracking now. So I'll just start the footage. Yeah, spoiler alert, there was at least one mention of the stop the boats earlier when we tried the stream earlier. Got about 15-20 minutes in before I had to abandon it due to buffering problems. This should be all be fine now. So that's just a clue. We've only been running this competition. It's not a competition, it's a game. A couple of weeks now. Yeah, it's not a contest. There aren't any prizes. As I said before, I'm not in a position to give out prizes, so let's crack on.
We now come to questions to Prime Minister Giles Watling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 1, if you please.
Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will join me in congratulating Vaughan Gething on his election as Welsh Labour leader and expected election as First Minister of Wales, and also offering Mark Drakeford our best wishes on his retirement. The government I lead will always work tirelessly to benefit the lives of people across the United Kingdom, and I look forward to working constructively with the new First Minister to deliver for the people of Wales. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others.
I'll just come in while they're going through the routine planted questionnaire just to point that out. Yes, the new leader of the Welsh Assembly, the first ever black leader of a political party in Europe. Amazing achievement.
I am doing everything I can to support them. With that in mind, does he agree with me, my right honourable friend, agree with me that cutting inflation is the very best way to do that? And that today's statistics are very welcome, and can he reassure my constituents that he'll continue working hard to get inflation as low as possible, to protect their savings, help with their bills, and give them the financial security they deserve?
Well, Mr. Speaker, today's figures show that our plan is working.
This is just your first typical planted question where they're going to lead on with a little political broadcast here about halving inflation, of course. We've heard him say that as well. It was a toss-up between half inflation or stop the votes for the contest.
People's pay packets are going further, with real wages growing for 8 months.
The game, it's not a contest, it's not a competition.
It's
a game.
Worker, and that is why we need to stick to the plan to deliver a brighter future for our country.
The Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Keith's up.
Can I thank
Keith
the Prime Minister for his words in welcoming Vaughan Gething to his post as First Minister of Wales. As the first black leader of any European government, it's a historic moment that speaks to the progress and values of modern-day Wales. Yeah. And I also pay tribute to Mark Drakeford for his long, steady service in Wales. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, violent prisoners released early because the Tories wrecked the criminal justice system. 3,500 small boat arrivals already this year because the Tories lost control of the borders. Yeah. The NHS struggling to see people because the Tories broke it. Millions paying more on their mortgages. A budget that hit pensioners. A £46 billion hole in his sums. Why is the Prime Minister so scared to call an election?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said in January, my working assumption is that the election will be in the second half of the year. But I must say, I thought that out of everybody, he'd actually be the most grateful, Mr. Speaker, because he's now actually got time to come up with a plan for Britain. We're all looking forward to finally seeing it.
We're ready. Just call it. Just call it.
I don't think so, Keith. The last by-election that we saw, you came fourth behind the Workers' Party of Britain and an independent who nobody had ever heard of before, so I wouldn't say that they're ready to go for a general election whenever that is.
4 times that number have already arrived this month, and the backlog stands at 130,000. Can the Prime Minister see any flaw in his plan to deport less than 1% of that backlog?
Here we go.
Mr. Speaker, since I became Prime Minister, the number of small boat crossings are actually down by over a third, Mr. Speaker. And that's because we've doubled National Crime Agency funding, we've increased the illegal enforcement rates by 70%, we've closed 7,500 bank accounts, deported 24,000 illegal migrants, and processed over 112,000 cases, more than at any point in the last 2 decades, Mr. Speaker. And it's crystal clear, as we're seeing from the Labour Party's opposition in this House, while we're committed to stopping the boats, the Labour Party would keep them coming.
It's another one. That's 2.
The tragedy is, we know the Prime Minister doesn't even believe in the Rwanda gimmick. He tried to stop funding it, but he's now so diminished that his entire focus is stopping his MPs holding the sword of Damocles above his head, perhaps even literally in the case of the Leader of the House. His great hope is to percolate his party with a couple of empty planes, praying they won't notice when the flights stop going, the boat's still coming, and the costs keep mounting. How has he managed to spend £600
also been
million
rumours that Tories are lining up to replace Sunak. We'll see if that gets brought up.
Mr. Speaker,
even more.
It's crystal clear. Not only does the Labour Party not have a plan to fix this issue, but the truth is they don't actually care about fixing this issue. When he talks about the gangs, when we gave the police new powers to crack down on the people smuggling gangs, he spent months campaigning and voting against it. But thanks to our new laws, 900 criminals have been arrested. 450 have been convicted, serving over 370 years behind bars. If it was up to him, those criminals would still be out on our streets, Mr. Speaker. And the truth is,
this xenophobia is awful. The crime rate for people who migrate to this country is lower, quite a lot lower. than actual people who were born in the UK. Because they want to come over here and contribute to society, to the economy. They don't want to get into trouble. It's a complete fallacy that migration brings an increase in crime.
It's going to cost the taxpayer £2 million for every one of his 300 people that they deport. And I know the Prime Minister likes to spend a lot on jet setting, but that's some plane ticket. It's the cost of Tory chaos.
Comedy
and it's
Keith
working
moment
people
there.
who are paying the price. The man he made his immigration minister let the cat out of the bag when he said the Prime Minister's symbolic flights will not provide a credible deterrent. And we know the Prime Minister himself thought it wouldn't work. If the people selling this gimmick don't believe in it, why should the country?
Mr. Speaker, he's very keen to talk about who he prosecuted. He's a bit less keen to talk about when he defended Hizb ut-Tahrir, Mr. Speaker. But when it comes to this question of how to deal with people who are here illegally, his values are simply not those of the British people. After all, this is the person who campaigned to stop the deportation of foreign dangerous criminals, Mr. Speaker. A dangerous criminal was jailed for dealing Class A drugs after he fought to keep him here. A gangmaster was convicted of carrying a knife after he fought to keep him here. So whether it's representing terrorists or campaigning for criminals, it's clear whose side he's on, and it's not the British people.
It's genuinely sad to see him reduced to this nonsense. And let's take another example that I started with. After 14 years of Tory chaos in the prison system, the Justice Secretary is reduced to begging the Prime Minister either to send fewer offenders to prison or to release them even earlier. I must say I've got sympathy for anyone trying to get an answer out of the Prime Minister. So what's it going to be? Fewer criminals behind bars in the first place, or more released early onto our streets? Which is it?
Mr. Speaker, thanks to our record and plan, violent crime has fallen by 50%, Mr. Speaker. We've recruited more police officers, given them more powers, and kept serious offenders.
Recruited more police? They've been trying to push that one for years. The number of police under the Tories has gone down by about 20,000, and then they throw a few crumbs on the table, recruit a few more, and say that that's an increase. When Tories are any time the Tories are talking about they've increased this, they've increased that, they always ignore the times when they've decreased it. That doesn't factor into those equations. Nonsense, just nonsense.
Offenders in prison for longer. What's his record? He voted against greater protection for our emergency workers, opposed tougher sentences for violent criminals, and failed to give police the powers they need. It would be back to square one with Labour, soft on crime and soft on criminals.
You can see why he doesn't want an election, why his party have lost faith in, why half his cabinet are lining up to replace him. No answers, no plan, no clue. And the Prime Minister has never had the courage to stand up to his party. So let me help him out and say to them what he wishes he could. The mortgage mayhem, the waiting list, the criminals walking free, they are the costs of Tory chaos. And if they can't bring themselves to stop the endless games and gimmicks, stop putting themselves before country, they should pack up, go home, and waste somebody else's time. It wasn't that difficult, was it, Prime Minister?
Oh, Keith.
Mr. Speaker.
This is what we're reduced to when the governing party and the opposition are so alike. It just gets reduced into this mudslinging. And Starmer can't say why he's going to be any different or any better to the Tories. It's just cheap point scoring.
Talk down Britain and and the progress that we are making. Today's news shows that the plan is working. Inflation down, Mr. Speaker. Energy bills down. Wages up, pensions up, and taxes cut by £900.
Not true, not true,
and
not true.
Higher taxes and back to square one with Labour.
National insurance isn't a tax, Rishi. National insurance is not a tax.
Mr. Speaker, the UK birth rate is falling while those requiring fertility treatment to conceive is rising. There are no employment rights attached to those undertaking fertility treatment, no paid time off work. Would the Prime Minister join me in encouraging employers, large and small, across the United Kingdom to sign up to the Fertility Workplace Pledge, which I have launched with Fertility Matters at Work, LGBT Mummies, Fertility Network UK and many others to support those undertaking fertility when they're in work?
Well, can I start by thanking my honourable friend for her excellent work campaigning on this issue. And she is right, employers should offer their staff understanding, support and flexibility whilst they're undergoing fertility treatment. And the best way to improve the experience of those undergoing treatment, both women and their partners, is through voluntary approaches. And that's why I would join her encouraging all companies to sign up to the Fertility Workplace Pledge.
SNP leader Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, with his
This is always good.
backbenchers looking for a unity candidate to replace him, which of the now numerous born-again Thatcherites on the Labour front bench does he believe best fits the bill?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it was surprising to hear all this talk about the 1970s from the Shadow Chancellor in particular. But then if you see what's happening in places like Birmingham, where taxes are going up by 21%, Mr. Speaker, services are being cut, whether it's social care, children's services, or indeed in some streets, literally the lights are being turned off. It was unsurprising why they're talking about
They always like to bring up the 70s, but for all that's said, we actually had a better economy than under Thatcherism. By far, we had bigger economic growth during the 1970s than under Thatcher. Obviously, she destroyed the unions and industries. The myth that she was the economic saviour is just that. It's not true. Anyway, Stephen Flynn.
Fiscal rules of the Labour Party and the Conservative Party are in effect identical. So with such
He's right.
So with such continuity on offer, Mr. Speaker, the public are right to be anti-Westminster, aren't they?
Just a quick pause. He's absolutely right there. You can't fault Stephen Flynn. He's such a refreshing relief when it comes to PMQs, and he's calling it out like it is. They're indistinguishable from each other at the moment, the Tories and the Labour Party. You can't even, put anything between them. And what have the British public got to look forward to in this general election with no choice? But we do have a choice. Let's remind ourselves, back your socialist independent candidate, back your grassroots socialist candidate as well. Whatever you can do to reject the status quo of these neoliberal shambles of the two main parties that we have at the moment. It's got to end, and it's up to the public to step forward and remind them that we do have a choice.
Mr. Speaker, I'm surprised to hear him quoting the IFS, because the IFS also described the recent SNP budget as, in their words, misleading, and said in their words that pain is almost certainly coming. It is a savage tax and acts budget, Mr. Speaker, a savage tax and acts budget. Because here's the reality of it. Whilst NHS spending in England is going up in real terms, in Scotland it is going down, Mr. Speaker. And while taxes are being cut by the UK government, it is the SNP government that is putting them up. And that is the contrast. Where the SNP or indeed Labour are in charge, it's working people that pay the price.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister quite rightly often criticised.
Just a quick point on what Sunak was saying there. in areas that don't vote for the Tories, they remove the investment and leave the towns and cities to crumble. We've seen it happen in areas like Birmingham recently, for example. That's one city that went bankrupt. Obviously, nobody votes for the Tories in Scotland. So they tried to withdraw the money for investment, and obviously the SNP are left with no choice but to increase taxes, and then Sunak comes back and tries to make out that the SNP are trying to ruin ordinary working people's lives, when it is in fact the Tories in the first place that are putting non-Tory voting areas in that situation in the first place. And of course they'll continue to reward areas that do vote Tory with investment, whilst everywhere else gets left behind. It's an old tactic, and the fact that he still thinks people can't see through that is just utterly pathetic.
Is the Scottish Government for the extra tax they put on residents. Well, in my part of Cornwall, we have an extra tax called the Tamar Toll. I've been working on a petition with my neighbour, the MP for Plymouth Moorview. Would the Prime Minister make our part of Cornwall, of our country, more competitive by losing this extra tax and help our country level out, our community level out?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising this important local issue. Any application for a toll revision will be considered by the...
I do cringe every time I hear level up or levelling up. It's ridiculous syntax.
...in place to create a new locally led focal group of key stakeholders to ensure that there is a real opportunity to make their views heard about crossings in the future. And I know that my honourable friend will play an active role in that group.
Sir Geoffrey Donalds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday saw the Northern Ireland Assembly, for the first time in its history, exercise its new veto powers to prevent the application of new EU law that would harm our ability to trade with the rest of the United Kingdom. This is something which the DUP campaigned to achieve when others were calling for rigorous implementation of the protocol. And to his credit, the Prime Minister was able to work with us to deliver the real changes to the protocol that will help restore Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom and its internal market. Will the Prime Minister now assure me that the Government will continue to faithfully implement the measures outlined in the command paper safeguarding the Union, including fully restoring our place within the United Kingdom and its internal market, and ending the unnecessary checks on goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland?
Well, I want to congratulate my honourable friend again on his leadership of unionism, and I agree it's been a very encouraging few weeks, and I salute the work of both the First Minister and Deputy First Minister.
This is just the Tories trying to catch up with the mess that was Brexit.
Including further regulations to be laid before this House in coming days to take power to deliver those commitments on UK internal trade, also hosting the first meeting of the UK East-West Council and the establishment of Intertrade UK.
No border in Ireland, they were saying. And now it's all gone to the dogs.
With locally elected politicians in place, representing the needs of all parts of the community.
Reverend Lee.
Noting the NAO report today on the spiralling costs of using ex-military bases for migrants, and noting that the Home Office has announced this week that they are to reduce the projected numbers at RAF Scampton down to 800, will the Prime Minister ensure that his Minister for Immigration meets West Lindsey District Council and myself urgently so that we can release most of the base for regeneration of this iconic RAF base, the home of the Red Arrows and the Dam Busters?
Well, can I pay tribute to the way that my right honourable friend has engaged with the government on this important issue for his local community. As acknowledged, our plan is working to cut the use of asylum hotels, and we will have closed 100 hotels next week, on top of cutting small boat arrivals.
So where are the people going to go? You close the hotels where people are staying. Where are they going to go? And the Tories, not even just the members, people who vote for them, and the kind of people who might ring up talking shows, right-wing talking shows, will say, we've got to get rid of this, we've got to get rid of X, Y, Z. They don't just vanish into thin air. These are people. They have to go somewhere. Closing the hotels isn't a good idea. They're safe there. Not 10 minutes ago, they were prattling on about how they think that immigration increases crime rates in the area. How are they simultaneously in a hotel room all day, but somehow at the same time committing crimes outside in the public? It doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. And it's just the latest in this anti-migration pathetic rhetoric that we're going to get from the Tories all the way between now and the next election.
But I know he's talking to the Minister for Legal Migration about how best to accommodate a smaller number of asylum seekers safely at RAF Scampton, whilst recognising the Council's ambitious plans for regeneration. And let me tell him, I fully support those discussions, and the Government is committed to the site being used for accommodation for the shortest possible time and then released to the benefit of the local community.
Mr. Speaker, our NHS is at breaking point. My constituent was told he needed a gallbladder operation after a visit to A&E. He waited in hospital, nil by mouth, all day, no operation. He's then told to stay overnight or risk his place on the list. So he sits in a hot, smelly, windowless waiting room for 8 hours on a plastic chair. Then a gurney comes with no pillow, and that's where he sleeps. And the next day, the nurses say, no operation, there just aren't any beds. His wife told me the Conservatives are running the NHS into the ground. Given his experience, given so many others across the country sharing that experience, how can he say otherwise?
Layla, don't be so naive. It was your party that aided the Tories to get in the first place. They couldn't get over the line, and then we all remember in 2010, the Lib Dems met with the Tories, agreed to form a coalition government. An austerity government is my main point, and that's what's enabled the Tories, and that's why we're still stuck with them now, because of the actions of the Lib Dems almost 15 years ago now. And when you back austerity, this is what happens, and this is what you get. And now, as a party, they've been completely decimated, as we saw in the last general election. The public have responded to that. So the reason why this is happening, Layla, if you go back and look further enough back in time, you'll find that it's because of the Lib Dems as much as the Tories.
Across the country sharing that experience, how can he say otherwise?
I'm very sorry to hear about the Honourable Lady's constituent experience, and I'm sure she'll be raising it with the local NHS Trust as well. What I would say is, of course, the NHS is recovering from a difficult 2 years, but it has received considerable backing from this government, record investment, as was acknowledged by the NHS CEO just the other week, a plan to improve productivity in the future. And when it comes to beds, we've invested in 5,000 new beds over the last year, more ambulances, and all of that is contributing to lower waiting times, waiting lists coming down, and an improved A&E performance over last year.
That's total nonsense, of course. The NHS has been decimated under the Tories, massive staff shortages. Brexit just added another layer on top of that as well. Don't have enough staff. They don't. The ambulance waiting times are awful. And that was all exposed during COVID as well, of course, just how understaffed, underprepared, underfunded the National Health Service is. It's never safe under the Tories. Any claims that they're making improvements, rubbish. It's just spin. They're trying to cook the books. And how he's got the neck to stand up and pretend that the Tories are any good for the NHS really does beg a belief.
Angela Richards.
Mr. Speaker, the people of the eastern villages of Guildford, the Clandons, the Horsleys, Effingham, Ripley, Send and Ockham have had enough. Unwanted development and villages taken out of the Greenbelt without promised infrastructure is why I've been calling for an immediate review of the local plan for the last 3 years. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that Labour's promise of concreting over the Greenbelt, even against the wishes of local MPs, would simply add insult to injury?
Well, Mr. Speaker, unlike both the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party, who believe in top-down targets that decimate the Greenbelt. We believe in local people having a say over their local communities, which is why we are committed to protecting and enhancing the Greenbelt. The national planning policy includes strong protections to safeguard this important land. I know her local plan is currently under review by the council, who have indicated they'll be updating it, and I hope the honourable member and her constituents engage with that process to help shape future Guildford for future generations.
Kendrick.
Mr. Speaker, the EU Foreign Policy High Representative Joseph Borrell said on Monday that Israel is provoking famine in Gaza and using starvation as a weapon of war. President Biden has said that there should be no attack on Rafah without a plan to ensure the safety of more than 1 million people living there. Does the Prime Minister agree with High Representative Borrell and President Biden? Because I do, and we need a ceasefire. If he does agree, would he say so here in the chamber today?
Also, as the honourable gentleman knows, I've explained opposition repeatedly, but the findings from the IPC are gravely concerning. It's clear that the status quo is unsustainable and we need urgent action now to avoid a famine. The UK is doing all it can to get more aid in and to prevent a worsening crisis. 2,000 tonnes.
That's not true, for a start, as we all know. They're continuing to fund and arm Israel. We're not sending the army over to assist the convoys, to escort the convoys of food, which is something that we could be doing. We're normally pretty quick to get boots on the ground in foreign nations just because we like it. Look at Iraq, look at Afghanistan, just recent examples, Syria as well. This is nonsense that the UK is doing all that it can. The first thing it should do is stop providing support to Israel. That'd be a start, and then actually get some boots on the ground and make sure that the IDF don't stop these convoys going through. And just to remind you that Secretary of State for the United States said yesterday that for the first time in history, 100% of a population faces acute starvation and famine, which has never happened before, and that's what Palestinians and Gazans are facing at the moment. This is unprecedented.
Of UK-funded food aid, including flour and hot meals, is being distributed by the World Food Programme in Gaza today, as we speak, enough to feed more than 275,000 people, and we will continue to do everything we can to alleviate the suffering that people are experiencing.
Sir Bill Wiggin, closed question.
Question number 9, sir.
Mr. Speaker, the Department for Education is mounting a significant intervention in Herefordshire's children's services. That includes expert improvement advice, a commissioner with statutory powers to direct the council, and a 2-year improvement partnership with Leeds. And I can assure my honourable friend that the department is closely monitoring the council's progress.
Sir Bill Wiggin.
I thank my right honourable friend for taking this situation, this terrible situation, so seriously. The permanent secretary from the Department of Education visited Hereford recently, and so he will know that the new Conservative Council are trying to mend the damage done by the previous Green and Independent authority to far too many young people and their families. As a father, does he agree with me that progress is still far too slow? And so will he meet me and discuss what more we can do?
Well, like my honourable friend, I am concerned to hear that children in Herefordshire are not receiving the level of service.
Well, maybe you could realise that you've been in government for the last 15 years. That'd be a bloody start, wouldn't it, Rishi? these problems come along and they act as though they've just fallen out of the sky all of a sudden. No, they're the products of Tory policy. They are the consequence of Tory austerity that we've had for over a decade, well over a decade, almost 15 years now. And that they act so surprised that these things are happening. This is on your watch. This is on the Tories' watch. I know that we've had 3 prime ministers in 4 years, and every time we get a new prime minister, they try and pretend as though they're not from the same party who've been piling on all of the crap that the previous prime minister, or prime ministers, plural in this case, pretending that that hasn't happened and that it's not the same Conservative Party. It is. It is. And speaking of which, maybe he should be looking over his right shoulder at Penny Mordaunt, as we discussed in one of our recent videos. She could be looking to be the 5th Prime Minister that we've had in as many years. Just beggars belief how they think that people have got such short memories.
That they should expect. And I know that ministers have revisited the Commissioner's latest report, and while some improvements have been made, I agree with him. It's also very clear that the pace of change is not what it should be. My honourable friend has been right to campaign tirelessly on this. I assure him ministers continue to hold the local authority for account, but of course I will be happy to meet with him to discuss his concerns further.
Hamid Yassin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Bedford Renal Unit is closed until further notice, while investigation into the water treatment unit are carried out. This is a major incident for the nearly 100 patients in Bedford, whose lives are now severely disrupted by the need to travel around 50 miles up to 4 times a week to access life-saving kidney dialysis. Will the Prime Minister commit all the necessary resources needed by East and North Hertfordshire renal unit services to urgently fix this major issue?
Well, I'm sorry to hear about the specific issue with the renal unit. I think he'll forgive me not being familiar with the exact details, but I'll make sure that we look into it in the department and that the NHS is being provided with all the support that they need to rectify the situation.
That was such a BS cop-out answer, wasn't it? Again, going back to the austerity policies of the Tories, that's what's responsible. Also, the lack of nationalised public transport as well, trying to keep transport based on private car ownership, whether that's commuting or, in this case, being able to access hospitals. They just don't want to know nationalisation. They just want to keep those private profits pouring in. And that was such a cop-out answer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow is World Down Syndrome Day. We have made huge innovative strides in this country with the unanimous passing of the Down Syndrome Act in this House, and initiatives such as yours, Mr. Speaker, to provide work placements here in the Palace of Westminster for people with Down syndrome. There is an outstanding issue we have to deal with, however. While the time limit on abortion in the UK is 24 weeks gestation, for Down syndrome, due to an anomaly in the law, it is 40 weeks up to full term, something that many members may not understand. With cross-party support, I will be tabling an amendment to the Criminal Justice Bill to equalise the time limit in line with our disability and equality legislation. Surely we cannot accept in the 21st century that people with Down syndrome are second-class citizens in our country. Will the Prime Minister support the change?
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for his dedicated work in passing the Down Syndrome Act into law. And can I thank him also for highlighting World Down Syndrome Day, where we'll be hosting a reception in number 10 to mark the occasion. As he knows, when the grounds for abortion were amended, Parliament agreed that doctors were best placed to make those difficult decisions with women and their...
Knowing the Tories, and I mean this, I'm not being ableist in this comment here, it really wouldn't surprise me if they called it Downing Street Syndrome or something like that. You know, he's not the best actor, is he, Sunak? This fake compassion that he shows. Of course they don't care for disabled people. Just look at the cuts that they've made. Look how services have been stripped away, whether it's physical health, mental health. The Tories have taken that all away, and a ceremony at number 10 isn't going to do away a decade and a half of Tory austerity, that's for sure.
Their families, and also, as he knows, it's been a long-standing convention that it would be for Parliament to decide whether to make any changes to the law on abortion, and that these issues have always been treated as an individual matter of conscience.
Hannah Bardell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Some of my Livingston constituents in Broxburn and Craigshill have the misfortune of living in houses built with rack concrete. Many of them can't get insurance, can't get mortgages, and one constituent told me very emotionally he cannot even afford a survey. So will the Prime Minister arrange for his ministers to meet with me to discuss how his government can fund local authority and devolved governments that didn't even exist when these houses were built, and give the support that was promised? We need action now.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect Sunak to be very quick to get into action there. Just pause for a moment to give a couple of shout-outs on the chat as well. Mithril, good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us on the chat. Great to see you back here again. Hope you're very well. So Sunak says, my government believes the electorate is thick as pig shits with the memory of a fish and will re-elect us because reasons. Yeah, pretty much that's what they're going for. They'll stick with the plan. Well, I know it's been 15 years, but surely something will happen soon. That's how naive and over-optimistic Tory voters are. Just maybe any decade now, things might start to improve. Yeah, good point. Thanks a lot for joining us again, Mithril. Hope you're well today. Let's see Sunak's response. Remember, they are responses, never answers.
Mr. Speaker, I'd happily look into the issue that the Honourable Lady raises, but in the first instance, I'm sure it would be a question for the SNP government in Scotland to answer, to make sure that they're providing for their constituents. And we have a strong track record of investing in local communities right across Scotland with our levelling up.
This is what you get. If something in Scotland goes well, oh, that's because of this amazing Tory government that we've got. If something doesn't go well, they blame it on the SNP, who, of course, don't have full autonomy, despite the best efforts so far and the denial of another independence referendum. So that's just the way it works. If it's working, it's the Tories. If it's not working, it's the SNP. Yeah, right.
Funding and investment partnerships, but when it comes to housing, obviously she'll know that that's a devolved area, but I'll happily look into the issue that she raises.
Andrew Rosendale.
Mr. Speaker, sir, the Prime Minister should be aware that the people of Romford are appalled by the catastrophic reign of the current Mayor of London. So, does he agree that traditional boroughs like Havering should have more independence from City Hall, but in the meantime, to save London, shouldn't we sack Sadiq and elect Susan Hall as the next mayor of our capital?
Sadiq Khan is the elected mayor of London. Whether you like it or not, Tories, whether you like it or not, and Labour obviously have a stronghold in London. It's not for the Tory government to decide at the stroke of a pen or whatever who is or isn't the mayor of London. It's an elected position. That question shouldn't even be asked. This is just ridiculous. And look at them all braying along there. You can see, speaking of bray, you can see Jonathan Gullis, who's one of the worst culprits usually, just there around there, baying like asses, like donkeys. And it's pathetic, this Etonian culture that still exists in the House of Commons.
Well, can I pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Romford's championing of his area and his passion to preserve its character. Now, as he says, whilst there aren't current plans to redraw the boundaries, I can understand his desire, especially with London being run by the Labour mayor, with nightlife being decimated, crime increasing, and the mayor raising taxes on hard-working people by over 8%. London can certainly, Mr. Speaker, do better, and the only way for pride to be restored in London is with Susan Hall as its new London mayor.
Are they going to try and tell us again that places like Tower Hamlets are these no-go zones, which of course turned out to be utterly false? as usual. Look at that smirk. He really thinks he's got one up as he smirks over at the Speaker for some reason, not across at Starmer. The vultures are circling for the Tory party. We know that much. It's just a matter of where the seats are going to go. Is Keith going to get a massive majority? Could it be a hung parliament or a minority Labour government? It depends how many people go out and vote for independents and socialist grassroots parties, etc. But at least soon, the Tory party won't be making these smirks. None of these quips are going to change that situation, I'm afraid, Rishi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last Sunday was the second anniversary of P&O Ferry's illegal sacking of 786 British seafarers. And despite what ministers have said, P&O has faced no sanction, and this government's new code of practice on fire and rehire would not stop it happening again. This Parliament will be the worst on record for living standards, and real wages are still worth less than they were in 2008. So why, after 14 years, has this government failed to deliver a better deal for workers across Britain?
Of course, we've had scandal after scandal. The most recent one with workers being the post office scandal. That's slightly different from fire and rehire, of course. But the same thing applies. Those employees who, do you remember the P&O scandal? They all went on a video call, or they all got an email saying that they were immediately sacked without working a redundancy notice, and they're still fighting a legal battle all these years later.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in fact, as the Chancellor just recently pointed...
And just another quick mention in the chat as well. From Mithril, Susan Hall is barking mad and so dim she embarrasses a 10-watt light bulb. Yeah, absolutely. The lights are on very faintly, but absolutely nobody's home. And P&O now stands for poor and overworked. Yeah, those poor workers, goodness knows what's become of them now. We just have to see these scandals just go on and on. Even the post office scandal was something that should have been dealt with years ago, and now look where we are. Look who we're left with. I mean, just look.
Pointed out, living standards are £1,700 higher in real terms than they were in 2010. And if he wants to do something to protect working people in this country, perhaps he should have a chat with his Shadow Chancellor about her plans to impose £28 billion of tax rises on everyone in our country.
Sarah Atherton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After decades of a Labour MP, Wrexham was...
Just a minute. What was he talking about then? The 28 billion of tax rises? No, you probably, and he's mentioned it previously, that they dropped that £28 billion pledge. They've not said how they're going to be taxing any of the policies, whether they've done a U-turn on them or not. So, when he wants to remember that they ditched, this is Labour we're talking about, by the way, that Labour ditched the £28 million Green pledge, he'll bring that up when it suits him. And then when it comes to trying to talk about taxation, public investment, he'll pretend that it's still on the cards. He thinks it's a win-win situation. Oh, Sunak.
known as Spice Town, but not anymore. In the last 4 years, we've become a city with a £160 million investment zone, £20 million town fund, £23 million shared prosperity fund, soon to have the largest trading state in Europe with more jobs than job seekers. We've secured the future of high town buyers.
Look at him. Jonathan, please be quiet. You know, how many times do I have to point this out? I was still this ridiculous procedure here, this outdated parliament that we've got, and they still get to sit and bray like asses and just shout things out like unruly children. Jonathan Goulis there being one of the worst culprits. Just pipe down, man. Just pipe down. You're all grown-ups, okay? When you look at other parliaments, even in the UK, the Scottish Parliament's far more cordial and far more respectful than listening to these public school boys trying to shout over everything.
Agree with me that it's this Conservative MP and this Conservative government.
He just doesn't stop. Look at him. It's like his head's going to blow up.
My honourable friend has been an excellent campaigner for Wrexham, putting it on the map after years of decline under the Labour Party, the heart of one of Wales's investment zones, with our plan for towns helping to regenerate the local high street and improve public safety. And I can tell my honourable friend, with such...
He's doing it again, like we were talking about before with Scotland, where they've divested from the area and then it crumbles. They'll blame the local Labour Council, who haven't had money to work with because the Tories have chosen it to be so, and thinking that they're going to be turning things around. Well, no. Again, the blame lies purely at the feet of the Conservative Party, whichever of the leaders that is, all the way from Cameron right through to Fishy Rishi here.
A great campaigner like herself, the next 5 years will only look brighter for Wrexham.
Ashley Dalton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Prime Minister rightly called Conservative Party donor Frank Hester's comments about the Honourable Member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington racist. It has since emerged that Mr. Hester has made comments that a group of Indian members of staff should climb on the roof, like on the roof of a train, and has made reference to Asian Corner. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that these comments are racist? Yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, I addressed this last week and the Minister for Women and Equalities addressed this just half an hour ago.
Wouldn't it have been quicker to say yes than say what you just said in that case, Rishi? I've tried to keep my eye out for Diane Abbott during this session. I'm not sure if she is there. If she is, I really hope that she gets a chance to stand up. Out of the 46 attempts that she made last week, she wasn't called upon to speak by Lindsay Hoyle, of course. Of course, those comments were racist. Of course, the additional comments made by Tories are racist as well. Just come out and say it. They are a racist party.
Father of the House, Sir Peter Bottomley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You and the Prime Minister will be welcome in the Arran district of my constituency, where developers are trying to build over every vineyard, horticultural nursery and agricultural land. Could he...
Look at that tie. Look at that tie. Ukraine much? Really? Well, it doesn't look like we're going to be hearing from Diane Abbott, unfortunately. They've moved on to something else unless they come back to the topic indeed, of Frank Hester. We'll have to see. That's just some tie.
Point out that the last place to build homes is prime agricultural land, especially in an area where developers have enough permissions to meet the Council's targets for the next 5 years.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right that sustainable development must be at the heart of our planning system, and that's why we're committed to meeting the housing needs of our communities by building homes, the right homes, in the right places, making...
You have got to be joking. You've got to be having a laugh. You are having a babble, mate. Where social housing especially, and the Tories are concerned, let's look at the facts, okay? This has been a crisis that's been ongoing since the 1980s, since the Tory heroine Thatcher allowed people to buy the council homes and then didn't replace them like for like with social housing. There's such a severe lack of social housing in this country at the moment. Do you know there's more land dedicated to golf courses than there is social housing? I don't know whether you knew that, but that just speaks volumes about the situation. There were more houses, but this again is private, not social, built under the Labour government, but the situation itself has been very dire ever since the 1980s. It's not just building the homes, it's the number of properties isn't the problem. There's millions of empty homes and properties in this country ready to be converted into social housing, but they don't want to do it because it's all got to go to private investment, because there's no difference between business and politics under the Tories, that's for sure. The more that the private sector profits, the more that their friends profits. You never know what kind of dodgy deals are being done behind the scenes, what kind of envelopes are being exchanged under the tables. You don't know what kind of groups are being allowed to lobby and what sort of sums of money are being exchanged at all to develop further private housing. A housing development company can buy a plot of land and sell property on that land before it's even built and cash in from the profits and the sale of a building that hasn't even been built yet. That's how bad the housing situation is in Britain. Just walk up your high street, you'll see it getting worse and worse year on year. Endless people, endless homeless people, especially through cities, and it's getting so bad now that it's spreading into towns. It's not just cities. The number of people using food banks is rising exponentially. Utter toilet from Sunak. This is utter bilge. It's such a shite hawk. It's difficult to come up with adjectives sometimes. Perhaps there aren't enough extreme adjectives to describe just how disgusting it is that he can stand there and lie. While, of course, as always, the Speaker fails to call him out, and we don't have any decent opposition in terms of the main opposition with Labour. So he's just left to run his mouth off.
Sure that everyone uses best use of brownfield land, conserving our countryside, but that's also the point that he makes, which is important. As I've been crystal clear,
conserving the countryside. Again, there are no clean rivers or streams officially in this country. You've got people like Therese Coffey to thank for that, allowing so many industries to pay to dump sewage. Do you know how long that's going to take to clean up? At the back end of it, the cost of that, a lot more than what they put up to be able to dump all that crap in the rivers. Believe me. No, again, that's a nonsense.
Must protect agricultural land. Food security is incredibly important, and we need our farmers to produce more great British food.
Food security is important. I suppose that's why we eliminated direct trade in the largest trading bloc in the world, i.e. the European Union, and instead of trading with our 28 nearest neighbours, we have to bring in food from the Americas or Australasia, including perishables, which by the time they get here aren't going to be in the same condition as they were if they were coming from continental Europe. That's for sure. That's the reason why we need to be producing more food here, but we're not going to be able to, because that ties into the climate crisis as well. If you know any farmers, whether it's arable farmer, dairy farmer, whatever it may be, you talk to them. I've spoke to quite a few of them, and they're very worried. They're already going through the reserves of last year's harvest because they can't grow new crops because of climate change that's happening in the UK. Are they hoping that they can fall back on that? That's not going to happen. That's just not going to happen. Food security is going to be one of the biggest impacts of the climate crisis in this country, and that's just piled on top of the fact that we've left the European Union and the single market, of course.
And this water.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We know the Prime Minister has received advice about the legality of the Israel-Gaza war, that he's had time to consider it, that governments can and do publish such advice. So will he tell the House what steps he is taking to act on that advice in reviewing UK arms sales, in supporting proceedings in the ICJ and ICC, and in exercising the UK vote in the UN Security Council?
Just before Rishi responds, obviously this is a very important topic. I'm glad that that's actually been raised. Just want to address a quick question in the chat. Mithril, do the Tory housing building numbers include student accommodation? If so, your home's seen massive building, otherwise not much at all. I am not sure exactly about that off the top of my head. What I will say, though, I'll go as far as to say that it wouldn't surprise me if they do, because you know how the Tories will always cook up the books. They will count things that shouldn't really count as the things that they are. I'm not sure if student accommodation should perhaps have a separate classification from social housing. And if that's the case, maybe they shouldn't be counted. But knowing the Tories, if they do build any new accommodation, I really wouldn't put it past them to include those numbers to try and make themselves look like they're building more than they actually are, if you follow my meaning. Thanks a lot for your question, Mithril. JC Vascod, great to see you back. Welcome back to the stream. Hope you're well. Tomorrow is your day, guys. Sorry, not sure what that's referring to. But try and get back to us on that. Thanks a lot for joining us on the stream. So yeah, this question that's just been put to Sunak. And I've mentioned this quite a few times before on streams and in other videos, how as citizens in the UK, we really need to be worried about the legality, as well as obviously the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the fact that legally, what Israel is doing is a collective punishment. And we obviously supply arms to them. We could be complicit. We could be legally aiding and abetting them. And if Netanyahu's going to find himself up in The Hague, then Sunak surely should as well. I hope that you'll all agree with me on that point, that these arms sales have to end. They've got to end immediately. And we risk as a country being dragged into this legally as well as morally. We're already leaving ourselves on the wrong side of history. There's over 32 Gazans who will attest to that, I'm sure.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we continue to call for Israel to respect international humanitarian law and for civilians to be protected. Too many...
Sorry, I say the 32,000 will, of course. I mean that they would if they were still with us. They're just victims of this escalation over the last 5 months as well.
Civilians have been killed, and we want to see Israel take greater care to limit its operations to military targets. These are points that both I and the Foreign Secretary have repeatedly made to Prime Minister Netanyahu. We have previously assessed that Israel is committed and capable of complying with international humanitarian law, and of course we always keep this under review.
Vickers.
I'm assuming...
thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The review in question there is just towing the US line, doing whatever Joe Biden instructs us to do or not to do. If as a nation we suddenly decided that we were going to cut these arms sales completely 100% overnight, then I have no doubt in my mind that America, who of course are massive allies of Israel, will be dragging Sunak over the coals and giving him a right hiding. That's probably the real reason that we're talking about. And that's something that you have to factor into these decisions.
Will be aware of plans by National Grid to build 50-metre high pylons and network through much of rural Lincolnshire, which is causing much consternation, particularly in rural villages. Could my right honourable friend assure my residents that when finally ministers consider the consultations that come forward from National Grid, that they will give sympathetic consideration to putting some of the sections underground?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise the concerns of his constituents, and he will recognise the balance that we need to strike by making sure that we give our country the energy security that it needs, but do that in a way that is respectful of the impact on local communities. I'll be sure...
Energy security. Okay, so you're backing finite industries that dig up fossil fuels, natural oil and gas. That's not security. When you're backing something that is a finite resource and not doing enough to invest in renewables, which would lift millions of families from the burden of those huge quarterly bills at the moment. But of course, I would be remiss if I failed to remind viewers that Rishi Sunak's family stand to gain a profit of over £1 billion from the new fossil fuel licenses that the Tories have issued. But I'm sure that's just a coincidence, of course. No, energy security isn't what Sunak's looking for. Private profit is what Sunak's looking for. And at the moment, he's getting that hand over fist because of these new fossil fuel licenses, which I'll just remind you, the Labour Party will not be vetoing as well if they get in.
Sure to make sure that ministers take into account the concerns that he's raised and that all the views of his local constituents are taken into account.
Final question, Taria Ali.
Mr. Speaker, given the Prime Minister's and his government's days are numbered and will soon be in opposition, will he use the small amount of time available to him and join the 138 United Nations member states and recognise the state of Palestine?
Mr. Speaker, our position has been consistently clear that we will recognise the state of Palestine when it makes most beneficial sense for the overall peace process. Of course we're committed.
When Joe Biden says so, even David Cameron, who's been brought back in, obviously unelected position in the House of Lords, even David Cameron has banded the idea around that there will be recognition of a state of Palestine, and that's clearly the right moral thing to do. Let's just hear the rest of Sunak's response.
To an ultimate two-state solution. But in the here and now, what we are calling for is an immediate, sustained humanitarian pause which would allow for the safe release of hostages, including British nationals, and more aid to reach Gaza. And we would urge all sides to seize the opportunity and continue negotiations to reach an agreement as soon as possible.
Please,
Those are the kind of deals that have been rejected by Israel in recent negotiations, and Sunak knows that full well. There have been deals on the table that have included returning hostages. There's 150 hostages out of the 250 taken since October 7th, but still 150 remain. That's been on the table, as well as a two-state solution. And Israel have come along and vetoed that. They've done everything from saying, no, we're not happy with this, to just not bothering to show up at the talks at all, which shows how serious they are about peace. Of course they're not interested in peace. Of course Netanyahu isn't interested in peace. He's a genocidal maniac, and that goes without saying that he wants this to go on as long as possible. But that's again pathetic response from Sunak.
Prime Minister's questions.
Well, that was just about that. We'll do a quick analysis now. Just bear with me, I'll get something up. How about Just Stop Oil? There we go. While we were... the topic of fossil fuels came up a few times in that PMQs, or in my response and analysis as well. I'll just leave that up while we go through that. Okay, so first of all, first things first, I didn't spot Diane Abbott there. Obviously, she wasn't called upon to speak if she was in the chamber, but I'm not sure if any of my eagle-eyed viewers might have spotted her. It'd be very interesting to know if she was there and tried to stand up again. We'd like to get her official response on record in the Commons, of course, about those awful comments by Frank Hester. So that's first interesting point. Result of the Stop the Boats game. I officially counted 2 there. I think that's right. So that's 1 up on last week anyway. I think the closer we get towards the election, the more we're going to be hearing it from Rishi Sunak. I might switch it up a bit some weeks and do something else. Perhaps something like We've Got a Plan, because that seems to be something that he likes to say a lot. There are obviously local issues, constituency issues that came up there. As I said about local investment, with Sunak's responses to those kind of questions. Basically, if it's been going well, he will try and take the credit for it. If things aren't going well and they've got a Labour council that has been divested from, then he'll of course try and put the blame on that. It might be a Green council, it might be a Lib Dem council, whatever other council it is. If it's not a Tory council, then he'll try and push the blame on them, of course. I'll just pop back over and keep my eye on the chat. Mithril, yeah, you're correct about Diane Abbott being treated disgracefully. Of course, the establishment must protect capital. She should be allowed to have a say in the Commons. I couldn't agree more. This is, for a start, with this whole debacle, the fact that it's taken so long for those comments by Hester to come to light. They were, of course, originally made in 2019, weren't they? And now that they're just coming to light, I'm sure that in the meantime, there have been other comments made by Tory members, the things that Suella Braverman has said, for example, and the whole rotten lot have got a lot to answer for where that's concerned. That's all I'll say about that. And you also pointing out that Israel takes the same attitude to Palestine as Russia does to Ukraine. Yeah, I try not to. Obviously, these two conflicts came up within a couple. They're both ongoing at the moment. Russia, Ukraine obviously started a couple of years ago. I try not to make too many comparisons because they're slightly different situations geopolitically. But Israel, I would say, does take the same attitude to Palestine as Russia does to Ukraine, in the sense that it's getting drawn out, and Israel's main bogeyman, which they manufactured and created, of course, is of course Hamas. And as long as Hamas exist, then they have an excuse to continue these awful bombardments. And I guess the same could be said for Putin, of course. Yeah, now you mention it, they do seem to have the sort of similar attitude as leaders, that's for sure. Who's to say how long either of these conflicts is going to go on for? Unfortunately, neither of them look like coming to a conclusion anytime soon. As always, I'm not, backing total victories in terms of old school warfare. I'm just looking for peace and a cessation to the fighting, because it's the civilians that are suffering more than anything, and these populations in Ukraine, in Russia, in Palestine, and lest we also fail to mention other areas such as Yemen and Sudan at the moment, who are awful humanitarian situations likewise. This recent revelation, though, from Secretary Blinken from the United States, that 100% of the population are at risk of acute famine and starvation, really does put the hairs up on the back of your neck. It's shocking. It really is shocking that the first time in history, when you consider all of the wars and conflicts that have gone on over the decades, over the centuries, that this has never happened before. It's completely unprecedented. Really does go to show what a horrific situation is happening out there, and we just want it to come to a peaceful conclusion as soon as possible, as with all of those other conflicts as well. Of course. Bear with me. 1 sec, just going to wet my whistle. Yeah, that seemed to... I'm not too sure if it was just me. I know I paused it a few times, but was that a little shorter than usual for PMQs? Was that under the hour? Was it around the hour? I'm not too sure about that. Not too much has changed. There were a few digs, of course, about these supposed challenges that are coming to Sunak. Starmer was really quiet there. He normally tries to get in to speak a bit more. Of course, there were a lot of different topics on the cards, of course. He tried to get a couple of quips, of course. As always, Keith's quips. I guess at the moment he thinks, as he has done for a while, he's just trying to keep his head down, not stick out too much. That's why his policies run parallel with the Tories so much. He's just thinking, stay quiet. People are so sick of the Tories, and this next election will be a walk. Be a walk in the park. That's what Keith's thinking. That's not what I'm thinking, and I'll be doing more analysis on that as we get close to the election. Of course, we'll just have to wait and see. But it was brought up recently that there might be an election in October. That remains to be seen, remains to be confirmed. Some people think that that was accidentally given away in an interview recently, but it's not been confirmed from Sunak. Starmer was calling for an election there, as we said. He said, we're ready. Well, like I pointed out, although they have the successes in those by-elections in Wellingborough and Kingswood recently, but the most recent one, which George Galloway obviously won, saw Labour coming fourth, and there was the whole hoo-ha over Azhar Ali, Labour's candidate, of course. But lest we forget that an independent also came second and got a decent amount of the vote share as well. But the fact that the Workers' Party of Britain got more than the other top six combined, not in terms of percentage, but in terms of actual votes by number, really does speak volumes. Since then, we've not seen Workers' Party of Britain, and I'm just pointing this out for recent history. I'm not a member or anything myself. I'm just a political observer. So don't get confused at this being a plug for the party. The most recent candidate that they've had was in the mayoral by-election in Lewisham, of course, and they didn't repeat the success that they had in Rochdale, so we'll have to see what happens. There might be some more by-elections between now and the next election, I'm sure. Of course, there should be by-elections in seats such as Lee Anderson's, where he's moved over to the Reform Party as well. A lot of speculation about whether Reform Party might pick a couple of seats or not. I'm not entirely sure. Obviously, the only reason that they've got one now is by default. And even Anderson himself is someone who was advocating for holding by-elections if a Member of Parliament switches parties just 2 years ago, of course, as we know. The irony of that, but we could see more by-elections between now and then. Let us know what you think. Yeah, and apart from that, I guess it was just pretty much the usual from Rishi Sunak. The responses, the vultures are circling. Of course, he knows his days are numbered. Anything he's going to come out with is going to involve a so-called long-term plan, and hope that voters will have a dose of amnesia and forget that they've been in power for the last 15 years. They don't have a Brexit to sell anymore. That's all been and done, and it's not gone very well either, as well as perhaps the only other thing that was in their manifesto last time out, which was HS2, and we know that that's not gone well. They had to scrap the northern leg, and it won't be covering the country nearly as far as they said it would. It's over schedule, it's over budget, it's an absolute mess, just like the Tory party is. So they don't have those policies to campaign on or try and get people to vote for them for. So it's all just going to be xenophobia, the phony culture war, the so-called war on woke, as they call it, which will just continue to oppress anybody who puts forward any progressive policies, whether it's on people's sexuality, trans issues, environmental issues, whatever it is, anything that's progressive, they'll always try and label as woke, as well as the xenophobia and anti-migration stance, of course. And it's so bad that we've made the game out of it with the Stop the Boats counter. But of course, people who come to this country contribute to the economy. That's not to say that nobody who comes to this country ends up committing a crime ever, but generally, when you look at the whole statistics, where migrants are concerned, the crime rates are actually lower than in the general population as well, because they just want to get on with their life. They've come here because they're in whatever situation, fleeing a famine or a war in whatever country they're in, probably one that we've had some sort of military intervention in the past, and they just want to work and get along. They do want to integrate into British culture and society, but British culture is supposed to be about accepting other cultures as well, and that's, you know, part of British values, so-called British values. Although we don't have a constitution, I like to think that it's something that we do include. We don't need this indigenous attitude where we cut ourselves off from the rest of the world, like we've done with the EU. For example, we've got to, and specifically with areas like the NHS, which have suffered more since we've left the EU. Lots of areas are understaffed. We need to welcome people. There are skilled people, there are tradespeople. There are many ways that people coming into this country contribute to our society and to our economy, and to act as though that's a bad thing and try and point the finger at them, try and point the blame at that for the crumbling state of the nation. It's just absolutely revolting. But do we expect anything less than from the Tories either? Mithril, you say the environment's your absolute top priority. You're old and won't see the benefits, but you want your grandson to be able to see the wonderful and weird aspects of nature that you can. Likewise, you know, for future generations, we need to take action now to make sure that they have a livable future. And I'm an environmental activist as well as a political campaigner and activist as well. I'd have to say it's probably my number one concern at the moment, because it's not just an issue for the UK, it's a global issue, and it doesn't matter where you go. If you want to escape the socio-economic situation in this country, if you're able to do so, then at least, you know, people do have the option of moving out of the country. But with the climate crisis, there's nowhere to go, there's nowhere that won't be affected by it. So I guess that's the main reason why it's my number one concern, as well as for future generations of my family, as well as everybody else's. I even know people who have been in long-term relationships or are married, and they're choosing not to have kids because of the state of the climate crisis and the lack of action that's being taken by world governments. Yeah, of course. And I could... one of Florky's has come on the chat. STB times infinity. I wouldn't put it past Sunak. He could perhaps break mathematical and physical barriers and actually do something infinitely. I wouldn't put it past him where Stop the Boats or something like We Have a Plan is concerned. Thanks a lot, but unfortunately it's all over by the shouting now. But do join us again next week. I've managed to resolve those buffering issues. Sorry if some of you tried to join us at 12 o'clock when I originally wanted to start the stream and get it as live, as close to real time as possible. Had a few buffering issues, but I've had a bit of a tinker and managed to resolve that. So we should be back at 11:45 on Wednesday next week as well. We'd love you to join us. Of course, we've still got the regular live stream on Sunday nights at 7 o'clock. Between now and then, we'll have a couple of, we'll have one or two exclusive members only live streams as well. So Mithril, you're very welcome to join us there. I can see you're a member as well as JC Vasgood. Thanks a lot for your contributions to the channel, and hope you're enjoying the perks. Hit the notification bell so you can keep up to speed with when our latest members only content is going to be coming out. And thanks a lot for being here as well. If you've not done so already, just please give a thumbs up on the stream. That'll really help to get this across to a wider audience. Thanks a lot for your comments as well. You've been great. You've all been very polite and cordial as usual. What a lovely audience we've got here on My Left Eye, and it's great to see our community growing week on week. So thanks a lot for being here and returning to the channel as well, for those of you who joined us recently. Okay, I'll start to bring things to a conclusion now. We've been going for almost 90 minutes, so yeah, we'll just be wrapping things up. Just a final reminder, please do check out some of our recent content as well. We did a video about the situation I mentioned, the declaration from US Secretary of State about the famine in Gaza affecting 100% of the population for the first time in history, as well as a bit of an analysis of Melanie Phillips' appearance on QT recently, BBC Question Time. So you can check that out as well. But she obviously tried to say that there's enough food getting through to feed the Gazans, which was just the absolute gall on this lady to try and claim that. So a bit of analysis about that as well. Check that out and some of our other previous content if you've not done so already. Thanks a lot for being here on the stream. Yeah, take care everyone. We'll see you on the next one. Yeah, take care and be safe, you too, Mithril. Enjoy the rest of your day. Don't let the Tories get you down. And we'll see you next time.